Galactic Council's chambers shimmered with golden light, a monument to the supposed unity of the known universe. Delegates from 100 worlds sat in their floating thrones, their voices raised in anger and condemnation. At the center of the vast amphitheater, Earth's representatives stood motionless. They had heard it all before. Whispers of distrust, accusations of recklessness, warnings that humanity could not be allowed to disrupt the fragile order of the galaxy. But today it was no longer whispers. Today it was a sentence. Chancellor Xever, his crystalline form refracting the glow of the Council's artificial suns, raised a many-jointed arm to silence the noise. His voice resonated through the chamber, cold and final. The decision is made. By unanimous vote, the species known as humans and the planet called Earth are henceforth expelled from the Galactic Council. You will no longer have access to Council technologies, trade routes, or diplomatic privileges. Your world will be placed under quarantine. Any attempt to expand beyond the Sol system will be considered an act of war. A hush fell over the chamber. Even those who had voted against Earth seemed stunned by the severity of the punishment. Humanity had been a young but ambitious member of the Council for only 70 years. Their rapid rise had been watched with a mix of fascination and fear. Some had admired their ingenuity, their ability to thrive despite their violent history. But the older races, those who had ruled for millennia, saw something else, a threat. Earth's lead ambassador, General Elias Carter, remained still, his face unreadable. He had known this moment was coming. The Council had spent the last decade tightening its grip, limiting Earth's access to the resources and technologies it needed to grow. They had forced humanity into endless bureaucratic battles while other species expanded freely, and now the facade was gone. The Council's true intentions were clear. Carter turned his gaze toward Xever, the faintest hint of a smirk touching his lips. "Understood," he said simply. Then he turned on his heel and walked out. No protests, no pleas, no threats. Just acceptance. The other ambassadors watched him go in uneasy silence. Some felt relief, others uncertainty. A few, those who truly understood humanity's nature, felt something else. Dread. As Carter left the Council chambers, he activated a secure communicator embedded in his wrist. A priority transmission was sent, relayed across countless light years to a hidden command center deep beneath the surface of Titan, Saturn's largest moon. The message was simple: execute Phase 1. For decades, Earth had played the part of the struggling, backward species. The Council believed its blockade had strangled humanity's ambitions. They thought their restrictions had left Earth stagnant. They were wrong. Deep in the Oort cloud, beyond the Council's surveillance, humanity's future had been forged in secret. The Erebus fleet, an armada of warships, manufacturing stations, and colonization vessels, had grown in the shadows, hidden by quantum cloaking fields and the cold emptiness of space. While the Council watched Earth's surface, humanity's best minds had been working beyond their reach, developing weapons, ships, and strategies unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. At the heart of this operation was the ESC, Dominion, a behemoth of steel and energy, the flagship of humanity's secret navy. On its bridge, Admiral Lucius Kane stood before a vast tactical display, his cybernetic eye scanning lines of data streaming in from the fleet's various sectors. The order had been given. Years of waiting were over. Commander Rhea Voss approached, her movements precise, calculated. "The fleet is at full readiness," she reported. "Final ship deployments are underway. The shipyards have exceeded their production targets. Everything is in place." Kane nodded. He had spent the last 20 years preparing for this moment. The Council thought humanity would remain confined to a single system, content with scraps. They had no idea that Earth had been preparing for war. "We begin with Cygnus Prime," Kane said, bringing up a holographic projection of the planet. It was a critical resource world for the Council, rich in raw materials and barely defended. the perfect first strike. The Voss studied the display. Resistance? Minimal, Kane said. The Council is complacent. They think they've tamed us. He turned to face the bridge crew, his voice calm but firm. Let's remind them what humanity is capable of. In the depths of space, the Erebus fleet moved. Hundreds of warships, carriers, and troop transports activated their cloaking fields and set course for Cygnus Prime. The galaxy had cast humanity aside. Now Earth would carve out its own destiny. The invasion began without warning. One moment the skies above Cygnus Prime were clear, the next fire rained from above. The first wave of the attack targeted orbital defenses, striking with pinpoint precision. Space stations ruptured, debris scattering into the void. Defense fleets scrambled to respond, but they were hopelessly outmatched. Earth's warships moved with terrifying coordination, their weapons cutting through enemy lines with ruthless efficiency. On the planet's surface, sirens blared as civilians and military personnel alike looked to the sky in horror. Black shadows descended. Dropships carrying cybernetic shock troops, enhanced soldiers who moved with inhuman speed and precision. They struck key locations in swift, brutal engagements. Government buildings, power stations, and command centers fell in hours. By the time the Council could send reinforcements, it was too late. Cygnus Prime, once a proud world of the Council, now belonged to Earth. On the bridge of the Dominion, Kane watched the final transmissions from the planet below. The Council would respond with outrage, with threats of retaliation. Let them. Humanity had taken its first world. And it would not be the last. The attack on Cygnus Prime had been swift and decisive. The Erebus fleet had struck with the precision of a scalpel, cutting through defenses before the Council even had time to react. What was once a thriving trade and resource hub of the Council was now under Earth's control. Smoke still rose from the ruined defense towers, and the last remnants of resistance were being hunted down in the subterranean cities below the surface. The battle had lasted less than a day. The war was just beginning. Admiral Lucius Kane stood on the bridge of the Dominion, watching the tactical feed display real-time reports from the occupation forces below. The Council had grown arrogant in its power, believing its vast network of alliances and ancient technologies would be enough to keep Earth subjugated. That belief had crumbled in a single day. A soft chime alerted Kane to an incoming transmission. The hollow display flickered to life, revealing the face of General Elias Carter. His expression was unreadable, his sharp blue eyes studying Kane with the same intensity Kane had always respected. Phase 1 is complete, Kane reported without preamble. Cygnus Prime has fallen. The planet is secured. No survivors in orbit. The last of the resistance planet-side will be eliminated within the hour. Carter gave a slight nod. Losses? Minimal, Kane replied. The enemy barely put up a fight. They were unprepared for a real war. He let the words hang between them, knowing Carter understood the implications. The Council had built its power through alliances and bureaucracy, not through war. Humanity, on the other hand, had been forged by it. Carter exhaled slowly. We don't have much time before the Council retaliates. They'll call for an emergency session, and when they do, the entire galaxy will know what we've done. We'll be ready. Kane turned toward Commander Rhea Voss, who had been listening in silence. She caught his glance and stepped forward. Our analysis of intercepted transmissions suggests that the Council has not yet determined the full scale of our fleet, Voss said. They know Cygnus Prime was attacked, but they assume it was a rogue Earth faction, not a full-scale military operation. They'll need time to understand what's happening. Then we use that time, Carter said. What's our next move? Kane tapped a control on the console, bringing up a star map. Cygnus Prime was just the beginning. We can't afford to sit back and let the Council dictate the terms of engagement. We need to hit them again before they can organize a response. He zoomed in on a sector of space known as the Lanthium Corridor. a crucial supply route connecting several of the Council's core worlds. If we strike the corridor next, we cut them off from critical reinforcements. We cripple their ability to mobilize against us. Carter studied the map. It's a bold move. If we take the corridor, we force the Council into a position where they have to commit to all-out war. Kane met his gaze. They declared war the moment they exiled us. A long silence followed. Then Carter gave the order. Do it! Kane turned to Voss. Mobilize the fleet. Without another word, she moved to relay the commands. The Erebus fleet began to shift, its thousands of warships preparing for the next strike. The attack on the Lanthium corridor began 3 days later. Unlike Cygnus Prime, which had been caught completely off guard, the Council had begun bolstering its defenses, deploying hastily assembled fleets to protect key routes. But they were unprepared for the full force of Earth's armada. The battle was fought in the dead silence of space, where no sound carried, only the cold efficiency of war. Earth's warships tore through the defending forces with advanced railguns, kinetic harpoons, and directed energy lances. Council ships designed for patrols and diplomatic escort were no match for the sheer brutality of Earth's weapons. As explosions rippled through the void, Kane stood at the command center of the Dominion, observing the battlefield with calculated precision. The Council's fleet was crumbling, and he had yet to commit even half of his forces. The enemy is breaking, Voss reported. Should we press forward? Kane considered it for a moment before shaking his head. No. Let them retreat. Let them carry the story of what happened here back to the Council. He turned toward the communications officer. Patch me through to all fleet commanders. A moment later, the holodien connected, displaying the faces of the officers leading Earth's forces. Each one had been hand-picked over the years, the best minds humanity had to offer. They had been waiting for this war as long as he had. The conference room was full of distractions and politics. Kane's voice was steady, resolute. We have taken the corridor. The enemy is retreating. The time for secrecy is over. The galaxy now knows that humanity will not be caged. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. This is only the beginning. The Council thought they could cast us out, but we will build our own empire, and we will do it on our terms. The officers nodded in silent agreement. No one needed to say what they all knew. Earth had spent decades under the Council's shadow, forced to comply with laws that weakened them, treated as an inferior species among ancient powers. Those days were over. The Council's emergency session was called within hours of the battle. Across the galaxy, leaders of the member races gathered once more in the great amphitheater, but this time there was no arrogance in their voices, only fear. Chancellor Zivor stood before them, his crystalline body dim with agitation. We have underestimated the humans, he admitted, his voice lacking the usual authority it carried. They are no longer a rogue species, they are an empire in the making. Murmurs filled the chamber. Some demanded retaliation, others urged caution. The Council had never faced a war like this. Their last true enemy had fallen thousands of years ago. They had grown comfortable in their supremacy. A voice spoke up from the delegation of the Andari Dominion, a race known for their strategic brilliance. We must ask ourselves, how did we let this happen? The answer was obvious. They had spent too long believing that Earth was weak, that it could be controlled. They had failed to see what humanity truly was. Zivor turned toward the Council's war advisors. How long before we can mount a counterattack? A long silence followed before one of them answered. Our fleets are scattered. Our forces are not designed for prolonged war. It will take time. Zeev clenched his many-jointed hands. Time was something they no longer had. Far away, deep within Earth's hidden command centers, Carter and Kane watched the Council's meeting unfold through intercepted transmissions. "They're afraid," Voss noted. "They should be." He studied the images of the panicked alien leaders. "They still believe they can win. We'll show them how wrong they are." Carter leaned forward, his gaze locked on the star map before them. "What's our next target?" Kane smiled. "We're not stopping at their supply lines. We're taking their worlds." The war for the galaxy had begun. The Council's emergency session dragged on for hours. Fear and confusion gripped the chamber as representatives of the core worlds demanded answers. How had this happened? How had humanity, a species they had deemed too primitive for true power, unleashed such destruction? Cygnus Prime had fallen in hours. The Lanthian corridor, a vital artery of trade and military movement, was severed. Hundreds of council ships lay in ruins, their wreckage drifting silently through the void. Chancellor Xivor had never seen such chaos among his fellow council members. The great empires of the galaxy, races that had stood unchallenged for millennia, were now staring at the first true threat to their dominance in 1,000 years. He raised his voice above the din, demanding silence. "The humans have struck a blow against our order," Xivor said, his crystalline body dimming under the chamber's light. "But they are still just one species. We have the combined might of the Council." Calm. A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly, but it was weak, uncertain. The truth was, the Council had not fought a true war in centuries. They had built their empire through diplomacy, through economic coercion, through the slow, methodical integration of weaker species. The humans had refused to be integrated. Now, they had declared war. A representative of the Andari Dominion, a tall, pale-skinned being with an elongated skull, stepped forward. "Chancellor, we cannot afford to underestimate them again. Their attack on the Lanthium corridor was not a mere act of defiance. It was a calculated military operation. Their strategy is clear. They intend to cripple our supply lines, isolate our worlds, and dismantle the Council's power from the outside in." Xivor's fingers curled against the golden railing before him. He knew the Andari were right. The humans had revealed only a fraction of their strength, and already the Council's forces were scrambling. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. "We will deploy the 7th and 8th fleets to reinforce the remaining supply lines," Xivor announced. "We will fortify the inner core worlds, and we will launch a counteroffensive. Humanity has overstepped. We will remind them why the Council rules the stars." Shaken, the people replied in unison. His words were met with nods, but no one looked convinced. Across the galaxy, hidden deep within the Oort cloud, Admiral Lucius Kane and General Elias Carter watched the Council's session unfold through intercepted transmissions. Their hidden operatives within the Council's lower bureaucracy had fed them everything: their panic, their desperation, their attempts to organize a counterattack. Kane took a slow sip of his coffee as he watched Xivor issue commands. "They still think we're playing by their rules," Kane mused. Carter smirked. "That's because they've never fought a war like this before. They don't understand how fast we can move." Commander Rhea Voss leaned forward, analyzing the data feeds streaming across the holo display. "They're planning to reinforce their supply lines. That means they'll be pulling forces from other sectors to cover their weaknesses." Kane nodded. "Which means we strike where they least expect it." He tapped a glowing section of the star map. "The Daedalus Rift." Voss raised an eyebrow. "Bold move. The rift is close to the Council's inner core worlds. Hitting it would send a clear message." Carter folded his arms. "It's more than that. The rift is home to the Thalzar shipyards. If we take them, we cripple their ability to build new fleets. We force them onto the defensive." Kane's cybernetic eye flickered as he studied the map. "We'll need to move fast. We take the rift before their reinforcements are in place. Then we move on their inner worlds." The decision was made. Orders were sent. The Erebus fleet adjusted course. Within hours, thousands of warships, carriers, and battlecruisers were en route to their next target. The attack began at the edge of the rift, where automated sentry stations monitored incoming traffic. Earth's stealth ships, equipped with advanced quantum jammers, disabled the stations before they could transmit warnings. By the time the Council's defenders realized they were under attack, the Erebus fleet was already deep in the system. The battle for the Thalzar shipyards was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in generations. Earth's warships moved with ruthless efficiency, their railguns and energy lances cutting through the Council's defenders with terrifying precision. The Council's fleet was larger, but their ships were built for deterrence, not war. Their weapons were designed to enforce order, not to withstand a full-scale military assault. Kane stood on the bridge of the Dominion, watching as the enemy's formations collapsed. The shipyards burned, massive structures crumbling under the relentless bombardment. Fighters weaved through the wreckage, finishing off the last remnants of resistance. "We've secured the shipyards," Voss reported. "Minimal losses on our side. The enemy is in full retreat." Carter's voice came through the comms. "They're falling apart faster than I expected." Kane's eyes remained locked on the burning shipyards. "That's because they've never had to fight for survival. We have." With the rift secured, Earth's forces now stood on the doorstep of the Council's inner worlds. For the first time in its history, the Council was under siege. On the home world of the Aelith sovereignty, one of the Council's founding members, alarms blared across the capital city. Refugees from the outer colonies arrived in waves, their ships overflowing with the wounded and displaced. The Council's elite, those who had spent centuries believing their rule was absolute, now looked to the skies with fear. Zyvo stood in the war chamber of the Council's high command, surrounded by his advisors. He had watched the fall of the rift unfold in real time, his crystalline body dim with dread. "The humans are not stopping," one of his generals said, his voice filled with barely concealed panic. "They have taken the rift. They have severed our supply chains. If they press forward—" "They will press forward," Zyvar interrupted. "They have made their intentions clear. They will not stop until we are broken." Silence filled the chamber. Then the Andari representative spoke again, his voice cold. "Then we must do what is necessary to survive." Exile met his gaze. "You mean surrender?" "No." The Andari's dark eyes glinted. "We mean escalation." For a moment, Exile did not understand. Then, realization dawned. A weapon. One that had not been used in thousands of years. A weapon so devastating that even speaking of it had been considered an act of treason. "Ah!" The room was filled with a heavy stillness. Exivor turned to his generals. "Prepare the Doomsday Protocol." Across the galaxy, on the bridge of the Dominion, Kane stood with his arms crossed as new intelligence filtered in. The Council was preparing something dangerous. Carter's voice came through the comms. "We need to move faster." Kane's cybernetic eye flickered. "Agreed. We take the core worlds before they have a chance to use whatever they're planning." The Council had thought they could exile humanity and leave them to wither. Instead, they had created something they could no longer control. The war for the galaxy was reaching its climax.